We all have seen images of Los Angeles in the grip of devastating wildfires, and people are dying in heat waves around the world. In fact, the world is heating up at an unprecedented rate. It is not just the heat. Earth, in fact, is witnessing floods, storms, landslides, and shrinking glaciers. A key agency that monitors weather events is the World Meteorological Organization. It's a UN body based in Geneva. The WMO collates and distributes critical weather data to all the countries in the world. We caught up with the WMO's Secretary General Celeste Saulo in New Delhi to understand the role of climate change in all these extreme weather events. I will ask her if the countries are doing enough to mitigate climate change. I will also ask her if the planet has reached a point of no return and whether we are doomed. Professor Saulo, welcome to PTI and thank you for taking the time to talk to us. You head an organization that is at the apex of many weather offices, many weather departments all over the world. And you have seen weather very closely, and weather is the result of climate. So that brings me to the question of climate and climate change. It looks like we are heading into a very dire situation all over the world because the way the climate change is happening, it's very evident. So give us the bad news. What is the worst that is going to happen?
Well, unfortunately, as WMO already announced that 2024 is said to be the warmest year on record, and that this anomaly with respect to the pre-industrial era is 1.55, and that
1.5 degrees Celsius more heat than it was before the industrial era.
Exactly.
But in 2023, it was also the hottest year ever.
Yes. So what we are hitting exactly is what you mentioned, that we have announced in fact that the last decade was the warmest on record. We are speaking now about a decade that has been subsequently meeting different or breaking new records, and 2024 is another record, but those kind of records that you don't like to announce, So that is what we are facing, a warming climate, and it's not only about temperature, it's about glaciers that are melting, ocean sea level rise, warming of the oceans. So there are many other, I would say, examples of how this global temperature is driving other effects.
There is also drought, there is also flooding.
Exactly.
The Antarctica has got the lowest ice ever. Yes. So it seems to me that the world is heading towards a major catastrophe. What is the worst case scenario if we do not stop this, if we do not mitigate the climate change? Where will we end up?
Well, many scenarios provided by the IPCC show us that we can face 3 degrees or more of anomalies, as you have already explained. And that has huge impacts. It's not about only the temperature, what are we speaking about? For example, the ecosystems. The ecosystems will be severely damaged because the equilibrium in the ecosystems is very delicate. So it's about coral reefs, it's about survival of different species that will not be able to survive. So that's why it's so important, the report of the IPCC highlighting that 1.5 was a threshold that we would not like to cross, and especially because of the huge impact on ecosystems, biodiversity, and sometimes we don't measure what this means to us. We say, okay, it's coral reef. What is the coral reef for me?
Yeah, exactly.
But a coral reef for us is a lot of species of fish and is for the industry of tourism, is for a whole system, starting from the ecosystem fishes that live on what happens in coral reefs, and then human beings that also lives on these fisheries, and then countries that depend on these fishes to survive. So it's a chain. Yeah. And when you modify this chain, you never know the effect. So that's why IPCC was so trying to put it very clearly. It will be catastrophic for the whole system.
It seems to me that mankind is in danger here. The human life or life on Earth is possibly in danger if we don't do something about it.
I think that it's hard to anticipate that, but certainly we can see that in terms of the vulnerability of many countries that are more exposed to the impacts of climate change. And if we speak about sea level rise, for example, this is a concrete threat to countries, to their very simple existence on Earth. So there is a limit we wouldn't like to cross, and I think that we should be all concerned about that.
Are the governments, are different countries doing enough to mitigate the problems we find ourselves in? Because we had pledged, the humans had pledged that by 2030, carbon emissions would be reduced by 43% by 2030, which is just 5 years from now. But at the rate at which we are going, we will reduce it only by about 4.5%. We are still very, very far from that target. The temperature that you just mentioned, that's also rising. So are the countries doing enough?
No, certainly no. And I think that this is something that we all need to address as a big collective, as a big community. That although maybe individual countries are reaching their targets, this is not enough, and that is the message. And your question is quite precise in terms of the messaging. It is not enough.
I want to ask you about the wildfires in California. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it is very, very dry vegetation which is catching fire and is spreading like wildfire because it is wildfire. Is this the result of climate change as well?
Yes, IPCC explains very clearly is that we have weather related to climate change, new weather or weather hazards related to climate change. And wildfires are part of this story. Why? Because as you mentioned, for example, if you experience severe drought, and we are experiencing severe droughts all over the world, and then you combine that with winds and with dry vegetation and land that is extremely arid, you have the perfect combination for the wildfire. So certainly each event to be attributed to climate change, you need to go through a scientific assessment. But what we can tell is that if you have all the ingredients in place, and some of them are straightly correlated with climate change, it has to do with climate change. And also land use. We do not discuss that much about land use, but again, this is about what you asked before, ecosystems. We are changing the ecosystem, because if we change the way in which we use the land has its own mechanisms to adapt. But if we build cities where we shouldn't be building cities, if we don't preserve the natural mechanisms to really balance what is happening, well, we have these disasters. So that's why we are all worried about what we are seeing, but it's part of our own activity, I would say.
Yeah. I'll just go back to the question on carbon emissions. What is stopping countries from reducing carbon emissions? India is doing its part. It has achieved a fair amount of success. Many other countries have not. What is stopping them?
Well, I don't have that answer, but I think that we need to change our perspective in terms of economy driving what. I think that we need to think in terms of sustainability, and I believe that sometimes some countries or some, I would say, private sector, why we should also speak about big players that take make their decisions and do not really care about climate. And in the end, this will be much more costly than taking care. But nowadays, maybe we are influenced by a short-term kind of thinking. And I think that we all should be engaged in long-term thinking. And I think that countries are not doing enough, companies are not doing enough, and we think we need to build a new approach.
And this brings me to the other question of climate financing, climate-related financing. Are governments just not waking up? Is private sector just not waking up to the magnitude of the problem?
I think that they are not. They are not waking up, and I think that they are, as I mentioned before, it's a short-range approach. But we have demonstrated through many studies and assessments that every single dollar you invest in adaptation, you can have an outcome, a positive outcome, 1 to 10. So you put 1, you get 10. So there are few enterprises where you can make sure that you invest 1 and you get 10. Why we do not invest at this level for early warnings, for example? So this is something that we need to raise awareness, and that's why I welcome this conversation with you. Because I think that we need a new thinking, a new approach to really make sure that the business as usual is clearly not driving us to the good place.
And the blame is equally shared by governments as well as private sector.
Definitely.
What about ordinary people?
Well, I wouldn't say that the ordinary people is to blame, but they should also be engaged. I think that this is, I would say, a global issue, and we all have a responsibility. Yes. Maybe we do not have the responsibility of what has happened, but we have responsibility about taking action, and every single person has something to do with respect to climate change and climate action.
WMO is an important stakeholder in this problem here. Tell me, is it becoming more and more difficult to predict weather because of climate change?
I would like to in this case, to go to this question with two perspectives. The first one is weather forecast is becoming better and better. So in terms of WMO contribution and National Meteorological and Hydrological Services contribution, we are doing our best to improve the quality of the forecast. But that is not enough. Clearly, this is not enough. So what is happening now? We have better forecast. Because of we have better forecast sometimes, and we have many examples where we can save lives and properties because we can go and advance a warning. But certainly we have these extreme events, and they are so harmful. And I wouldn't say that they are completely unexpected, but what is happening is that they really are so intense, and so it's out of the common, I would say. And forecasts are becoming better, but still these extreme events, as you mentioned, are on some occasions are more difficult to predict because they are so extreme that your statistics and nothing reflects a high possibility of occurrence, and in fact they occur. So we have to be prepared for events that are in the, I would say, in the tails of the statistics, and the science is always moving forward, and we understand more and we generate better forecasts. But we need to really work with those tails, those extreme cases where we need extreme action also.
Mm-hmm. And you are in India, you attended the 150th year of founding of the India Meteorological Department. You had discussions with your counterparts and your colleagues. Did you discuss climate change with them, and what do you expect countries like India, developing countries like India, to do more? What do you expect them to do to mitigate climate change?
I think that India is very well positioned in terms of the quality of the meteorological and climate services that they provide, thanks to IMD, and I would say that 150 years means a lot. Few countries can tell to the world that they have met services with 150 years. This speaks of a history. Of course, monsoons are part of the story of India, no? And the response to monsoons and to tropical cyclones had to be very important from many years ago. So, but it's also a policy within the country that understands that meteorology and climate is important. You need to invest on that. So, of course, and I could also tell that IMD is very well positioned in the society among many stakeholders, with many other agencies that work in areas that are proximately to are very proximate to IMD. They need the information from IMD to take action. And I see that network is building very well here in India. So what I expect, going to your question in the developing world, is reinforcing the role of the Met services, not for just thinking of the Met services as the provider of the weather forecast on the TV, as the weather service as the provider of critical information for climate adaptation, for productivity, for energy transition, and for securing people and people's lives. Because in the end, if you think about renewables, wind, solar, hydro, they all depend on weather. So energy transition, in a way, needs a Met service that is strong, and maybe some developing country colleagues are not there yet, as India is there, understanding the critical role of the Met service in the whole, I would say, development agenda. And if you take 1 second, and I invite everyone who is looking at this conversation, what can you think of an activity that is not impacted by weather?
That's a tough one, you're right. I want to go shopping. Yeah, that is also impacted by weather. I can't go out if it is raining. I would want to know if it is raining or not, yeah?
Yeah, and if you run a logistics company and you need to move a truck from one place to the other, and you can be blocked because of snowfall, you are losing tons of money. So the value of a good weather prediction is huge for investments, for investors, for businesses, for productivity, for logistics, transportation, tourism, everything. And so, for example, in the Caribbean, because of climate change, they experienced this algae that is not nice for tourism, and they move to other beaches. Right. So it's about, yes, their basic income comes from tourism. If they cannot attract tourism, what do? Again, of course, algae growing in the ocean, but because of high temperatures, they grow much faster. So,
because the temperatures are rising near the shores in ocean, the algae is coming closer and closer.
Yeah. So,
and that's affecting tourism.
Yes. So,
agriculture also gets affected by weather. Yeah.
So in the end, I think that what we need to put in the agenda is the role of the Met services into this decision making that impacts the economy and the sustainability of the economy of every single country. And that is particularly relevant for the developing world.
So basically you're saying that almost every aspect of life is impacted by weather, which people don't realize. It's there in the back of your minds, in the background, but everything that we do is impacted by weather.
Yeah, but at the same time, what I'm saying is that if you don't use weather information in your decision-making process, you lose the opportunity to really get the best out of your own business. Right. So if you use it just as an incidental information, but not as a key information, you are losing the opportunity to, for example, get more earnings from your decision making.
I have a question. When you sit with other experts, your colleagues, all of them are climate change experts, and then you start discussing, and it gets really depressing after a while to talk about how, countries are not doing enough. Do you ever say to each other, my God, we have reached a point of no return? Have we reached a point of no return?
I don't think so. Although we have to recognize that, for example, the level of warming of the ocean has consequences in the centuries to come. So sometimes we are biased toward very short time scales, the ones that are relevant for us. But I think that we are selfish thinking in that direction, because my grandson, for example, he will experience weather and impacts that I did not experience, and that is not fair for him. So I think that yes, the no return that you mentioned, sometimes from the scientific point of view it's hard to say, okay, we have a no return point, but really what is happening in the ocean has impacts of centuries. Is that a no return? Not technically, but for you, for the generations that we can envision, it will have an impact.
That's a scary thought, that what kind of a world, we are not going to be here forever, but the next, after 4 generations, maybe they will see the impact of what we have done today.
Yes, and that is where our strong connection with youth needs to really grow. Because certainly, of course, it's engaging every generation. Every generation has a role to play here. As we were discussing before, every single person has something to do. Yeah. But when we speak about youth, we need creativity, we need different approaches. Because if we continue business as usual, we know where we will end very badly.
Yeah. I have a question which is slightly less depressing. Why is the climate change industry or the system and the weather forecasting system so heavily male dominated? Why aren't there more women?
It's a very good question. I think that it's part of the gender agenda, where these scientific areas related to physics, chemistry and maths are not promoted between young girls, and there is a bias in general, and we all recognize that there was a bias at least, and I think it's still a very heavily biased towards, okay, if you are a male, let's play with this chemistry, whatever, and if you are a girl, go with your dolls, and that is, as a result of that, you end up sometimes allowing some kind of profile to girls different of the profile you expect from boys. I think that we need to change that matrix.
So how do we inspire girls to join the weather forecasting business?
I am passionate about this world, and I'm also passionate about the impact of working in this area, because it's not, and this is something that women really care about. Mm-hmm. In general, we associate women with care, and let's say that if you work in climate, you can care about others from a different perspective, but it's about care. And I think that this applied science, that is meteorology and climatology, is very attractive because you can see that you study these topics, but what you do is very impactful even for your family, because we were already discussing this. Everything is impacted by weather and climate. So for me, it's about, yes, opening the door for women and young people and girls to really see in meteorology something that is very interesting from the point of view of physics and maths applied to a system, which is the atmosphere, but also to work and engage in something that is extremely impactful.
Mm-hmm. Professor Saulo, you come from Argentina. You're the first woman Secretary General of WMO, the first person from South America to head WMO. Can you tell us a little bit about how climate change has affected your country? Is there any specific example that you would like to cite?
Yes, I would say that my country has been affected by climate change. Not in particular, I would say that the global or the mean temperature, the average temperature is not as high as in other countries, but the extreme events again are very evident in Argentina. We have suffered in the last few years. In the last year, before I started as SG Secretary General, we had a drought that impacted our gross product very severely, and that impacted every single person in the country. And then we had floods. People get killed, of course. The early warning system is good, but of course it can be improved. And severe storms with hails like this.
Which is unusual, never happened before?
They are more frequent. They are much more frequent.
And the size of the hail is
the
becoming...
size of a hail of this size,
it
does not, yes, it does not happen every single day, but if you have a hail like this, you can imagine. So extreme events are being very harmful in Argentina, and so that's something Argentina needs to get prepared for.
On that somber note, Professor Saulo, we'll have to wrap it up. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.